Hey guys, Eric Brody here. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Traktor's controller manager, and I'm going to show you how to set it up with any generic MIDI controller to perform a few functions. To open the controller manager and the Traktor preferences, you just hit Command, comma. To begin with a little bit about Traktor, it's a professional DJ software used by a ton of top DJs. Traktor allows users to perform with up to 4 decks and provides looping, queuing, sequencing, and remixing capabilities. Traktor also offers over 40 great effects, multiple mixer modes, and is stems ready. Stems are a multi-channel audio file that can contain a track split into 4 musical elements. Traktor's hardware controllers from Native Instruments are tailor-made for Traktor software. These controllers deliver seamless and physical control over the software. To the naked eye, it might seem like these are simple and how all these NI controllers work so seamlessly, but underneath the hood, they actually have quite complex MIDI mapping structures in place. And the cool thing is that you can import new MIDI maps from third parties online, or completely redesign your own Traktor for the controller manager. On a side note, Native Instruments controller editor software is also really helpful. The controller editor software is a useful tool which allows you to import and assign MIDI templates to NI hardware in order to control other softwares. So back to the main focus of the video, the controller manager. What we see here is Traktor's controller manager page. The controller manager is a place to create, edit, import, and export controller manager mappings. A controller mapping establishes a relationship between the control elements, i.e. knobs, faders, buttons, encoders of your hardware MIDI controller and the functions of the Traktor software. All changes made in the Traktor controller manager will come into effect immediately, meaning that if you can check the functionality of your configuration while you have this box open by just hitting the button on the MIDI controller that you're programming, and you'll see it respond in Traktor without closing this box. Right now, we're actually looking at Traktor 2's default mapping set for generic MIDI keyboards, so that the software functionality can be controlled from my actual QWERTY keyboard. So the space bar opens and closes the browse, and I can see the layout of the mapping's functionality, and usually they're pretty in depth. The device setup section up here allows you to choose a MIDI controller mapping for a specific controller or add a new mapping to a device. If I have a new controller, I can add another controller in here and start from scratch, which I will do in a bit. The assignment table over here lists all assignments for the mapping you've currently selected from the device list. There are 8 columns in the assignment table. Control. This is the type of action or function to be triggered in Traktor. You pretty much have every single Traktor parameter available to add to this list. The MIDI in or out assignment column means this will be a function to be triggered by input from your MIDI controller or triggered as an output, which will send a MIDI signal to your controller, for example, lighting up a button. The assignment column is the target section for the control. Mode shows interaction mode. Now the options available for the interaction mode will vary depending on both the type of controller as well as the control target of the currently selected assignment. So each one of these controls pretty much have different types of modes that they can go into. So it's hard to just say one for every single thing. But once you open up a new control, you'll see all the options pop up in the bottom. Mapped to shows either the control source for input controls or the target for output controls. Condition 1 and Condition 2 show the values for the modifier conditions. It's important to understand what modifiers are and how they work before designing your own mapping. Basically, modifiers are a control type in Traktor which can be used to define conditions for other assignments in the same mapping. Modifiers can be used to set up shift buttons so that the same knob, button, or fader on your controller can be assigned to multiple control elements. Modifiers can also be used to key or toggle between different assignments for other control elements. When setting up a modifier, you will create what are called conditions for the target control elements. Modifiers can be confusing when you're just getting started, but they're important to understanding how MIDI controllers can make the most out of less buttons, knobs, and faders, as well as programming your own MIDI controller. So now that you have a foundational understanding of the controller manager, I'm going to explain a few examples of potential mappings that can be applied to almost any generic MIDI controller. In the first example, I'm going to create a mapping that will, with the push of one button, load a track into a specified track deck while simultaneously turning the deck sync function on. I'm also going to make sure that the sync function will not be able to be deactivated when I load another track into the same deck. So first thing I'm going to do is start a new device by adding generic MIDI, and I'm going to set it to my Korg micro key, the keyboard I have right next to me. So I'm going to go down to MIDI in for micro key inputs, and this part doesn't matter so much because I'm not feeding MIDI out back into the keyboard, but just select it anyway. So I'm going to add in deck common control for load selected deck. I'm going to map this to a key on my keyboard by hitting device mapping and learn and hitting note C3 on my keyboard. Basically now when I hit C3 and I go to a new track, it's going to load that track up, but it's not going to engage sync if sync's not engaged yet. So I'm going to add another function for deck common, and I'm going to say sync on, and I'm going to learn it to the same button. Cool, so now when I hit the button, it's pretty much just going to hold sync on as long as I'm holding down the button, and let go of sync when I let go of it, as described down here. So first thing I want to do is make sure that when I'm loading a selected deck for this key, I'm going to add it to deck A, that's the target, and on sync on, I'm going to add it to deck A as well. What I'm going to do here is going to make sure that sync on is not able to be turned off. So I'm going to change the interaction mode to directly go to whatever value I set it at, and with sync on there's two values, so it's 0 and 1, basically on and off. So 0 is off, on is 1. So if I set the value to 1, now anytime I hit the load button, it's going to also load the track, turn sync on, and just direct it to value 1 and never anything else. Cool. So that's the first example. In the second example I'm going to create two buttons that will gradually increase and decrease the playback speed of a playing track. Releasing these buttons will trigger tempo adjust assignments to reset the tempo to its original value. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is add in a couple tempo adjust controls. I can hit duplicate if I wanted to add another one. But so first I'm going to make it go up with the push of a button and go back down when I release that button. I'm going to make this learn. I'm going to learn them both to the same button. I'm also going to add a modifier right after this, and I'll explain why in just a sec. Modifier 1, learned to the same key. So they're all highlighted now because they're all synchronized to the same key. First tempo adjust is going to be a button that increases and automatically repeats. So it's basically a tempo adjust button, so every time you would hit it, it would increase this up 1. So you want to make this on a master so that I can control it while it's playing. And if I hold it down while it's playing, it should increase. Okay, so it increases at the default amount. I can make that more of like a minimum amount or a fine amount. The second one for tempo adjust, I want to change that to decrease, auto repeat, and invert that one. So when I let go of the button, that's the function that will trigger this function. But I don't want it to trigger that function until I'm ready for it to let go. So basically, just one sec. See, it's triggering it at the same time that I'm holding it down. So with a modifier, I can make sure that the tempo decrease is not engaged until the modifier is, so that the tempo increase is disengaged when the modifier is engaged. So what I want to do here is set a condition for the decrease value to when M1 equals 1, and I'm going to set this to only hold a value of 1 when I'm holding down that button. That way tempo decrease is not basically trying to conflict with my increase at the same time as I'm holding the button down. It's only going to tag this once I let go of the button. And I find that it switches back to the original tempo most seamlessly when I switch this to the switch resolution. So now when I play the track, and I let go of it, it jumps back to the original tempo I was at. So just to recap, when I'm holding the button down, tempo adjust is set so that it's not decreasing because I'm having my modifier at 1, and that's the condition that tells tempo adjust to decrease, not to engage. Cool, so basically to get the opposite going, I just have to duplicate these a couple times and just do the opposite. So I'm going to add in a couple more tempo adjust settings and another modifier, and set the first to the second to another button. Set them all to another button right here. Turn learn off. Tell tempo adjust to decrease, auto repeat, fine resolution. Tell this one to increase, invert it, set it to switch. I'm going to tell the condition for it to jump back up to only jump back up when modifier 2 is on after 1, and set modifier 2 to hold value number 1 when I'm holding that button. Cool. So you can adjust the amount that it switches back to one of these resolutions. You can also tell it basically, instead of increasing back, I just want it to reset to the sort of like the original 0. So if I let go, it just goes straight to 0. But I find it can get closest to the original that you hit the button from when you're going. You want to definitely assign those to deck A so that you're only controlling a volume, adjusting tempo for deck A. Cool. So on to the next example. In the third example, I'm going to create a mapping for one button to select a specific effect, reverb T3, as a single FX unit on FX slot 1. I'm also going to create a shift function to use the same button to toggle the size parameter of the effect. So the first thing I want to do is go into add in. I'm going to add an FX selector, FX unit 1 selector. I'm also going to go to FX mode selector. I'm going to make sure that it's just applying to knob 3, the size portion of the reverb unit. So I'm going to add knob 3. I'm going to make one more modifier as well. Cool. So with the push of a button, you can have all of them be set to the same button, but I only want knob 3 to work when modifier 3 is basically set to another button and telling it it's okay for knob 3 to work now. So I'm going to set knob 3 to another button and tell that to hold at value 1. So essentially up here I can see that I'm holding down that modifier and it's engaging value 1. That's basically a shift button so that I can tell knob 3 only work when modifier 3 is at value 1. So next thing I'm going to do is make this a button. Go direct to reverb T3. So I'm going to be directing this button for FX1 selector directly to reverb T3 and assigning to FX unit 1. So basically if I hit that button now I get a reverb T3. But when I'm letting go of it, it's going away. So I want to make sure that the FX unit mode selector is set to directly to a single group. Cool. Now basically instead of just directing it onto FX1 and becoming a basically 3-unit FX unit, I'm changing it to basically become a single FX unit by changing the FX mode selector to direct it into becoming just a single 1FX unit. So the second thing that I'm going to assign for that same button is going to be controlling knob 3. And if I hold down the shift button like I just created by holding down the next button with modifier 3, knob 3 is engaged, so I just have to direct it towards that size parameter, and I'm going to make it a button because it is a button, it's just a keystroke, and I'm going to make it increase and that does it. So now when I'm holding down shift, I'm hitting that same button that loaded up the reverb unit. So if I go to a new effect and I just hit that first button and go straight back to the reverb unit, and I hold down my modifier button, which is essentially the shift button, and I push that button, I'm jumping up at default increments. I can also go small increments. Cool. So for my last example, I'm going to create a mapping for a pushable endless encoder. I'm going to use my machines knob to control 2 different assignments. The encoders are going to be used to control the dry-wet effect knob of a single unit FX1, and while depressed, it will shift functions in order to scroll through the available FX list. Cool. So basically my core MIDI controller doesn't have any endless encoders that are pushable, so I'm just going to add a new device. Don't have the machine controller in my list yet, so I'm going to add that in. generic MIDI. By the way, the core settings are all saved in there, and I can export those. But now I'm just going to add generic MIDI device. The input ports are from my machine, MK2. And I'm going to first add in a dry wet adjust for FX. And I'm going to add in an FX1 selector. I'm going to add in a modifier too. That's basically going to be my shift mode. I'm going to make the FX selector only modifiable when M1 equals 1. So first I'm going to learn them all to the same, learn both the knob parts to the same parameter, the machine endless encoder, turn learn off, and I'm going to make the modifier learn to the clicking in the encoder. I'm going to set the FX1 selector to be fader knob. And same thing with the dry wet adjust, fader knob. I like having it at relative, that way I can adjust the sensitivity of the encoder. And I'm going to set the condition for FX1 selector to be M1 equals 1. And then I'm going down to here, the modifier 1, which is the button, and I'm just going to set it to hold. I set the value to 1. So now when I click this in, you see my modifier value switching between 1 and 0, which basically makes 0 is this one right here. It's just no conditions are set, so it's always going to be on that. I can set it to M1 equals 0, and that will be basically the only time that knob will adjust that parameter, and then I can have more parameters adjustable by this one knob. But for this example, I'm going to keep it basic, and now I'm just going to turn the knob. So I can go up or down, and I can adjust the sensitivity of that when modifier 1 state is 0. And now when I click in, modifier 1 state is 1, and I'm going to be selecting the actual from the list of FX selections. And I find that one to be a little bit better when it's a higher rotary sensitivity. That's about it. That's the overview of Traktor's controller manager. There's a ton that you can do with it, and you can learn a lot from importing some TSI files. Those are Traktor setting files for particular controllers, and go to town with it. You can get really ambitious and make some wild controls that will control a lot of your parameters in Traktor. Hope you guys learned a good amount from that video, and happy jamming.